Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I shall be reviewing volume 29 of The Walking Dead, which covers issues 169 to 174 of the comics. As expected, there will be full spoilers included in this review, so please don't watch any further if that's a problem. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to get this straight out there immediately and let everyone know that this is definitely not one of my favourite chapters of the comics. Now, I'm not saying it's absolutely terrible and unreadable, but I did find it to be one of the weakest installments of The Walking Dead that I have experienced for quite some time. A lot of the reasoning behind why I feel this way is that the overarching plot feels like it's going through a transitional period, and because of this I didn't find it half as compelling as past entries. The Whisperer arc had pretty much come to an end last time around, with the characters now being afforded a breather during these 6 included issues. Whilst the change in pace doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, for example, I found some of the moments between the Governor's 2 assaults on the prison to be just as engaging, if not more so, than the actual assaults themselves. Sometimes, however, when there isn't an antagonist or an end goal for our heroes to focus on, things can end up feeling a bit aimless and limp. And for me, the middle section of this book definitely gets dragged down and stuck in the mud a bit, and it seems like a lot of what actually occurs simply takes place in order just to set up future events. That being said, I do believe volume 29 is bookended by a great start and finish, which did result in me looking forward to seeing what is coming next. As previously alluded to, the start of this installment is fantastic, as the reader is treated to a beautifully poignant scene of Carl explaining to Lydia the reasons behind why he came to see Andrea as his mother. Whilst doing so, he also tells Lydia about when he killed Billy and why he kept this a secret from Andrea. I really liked this nice little throwback, and I also liked how Carl revealed that when he told Andrea about what he had done, she replied by saying that she loved him, proving what kind of a special woman she really was. Although this entire scene only took place over a few pages, it was actually rather moving and also managed to feel like a natural conversation. Sadly, reading this however just reminded me of how much of a missed opportunity Carl and Andrea both were on the show, but anyway, that's not really relevant to this review. With Carl still feeling the effects of the lady he had come to identify as his mother, his father Rick wasn't taking things much better. In fact, he found himself repeatedly spending all night curled up next to Andrea's grave, unwilling to leave her side. With all this going on, the last thing Rick needed was someone questioning his leadership skills. Well, enter stage left Dwighty Boy to really ruin Rick's day, as he proceeded to face up to him to let him know that he now wanted to be in charge. Immediately, I found this plot point to be kind of strange, due to the fact that not too long ago Dwight stepped down from being in charge of the Saviours because he didn't like the pressure of being a leader. So why now did he feel the need to replace Rick? Well, it turns out Dwight's anger stems from Rick accidentally killing Sherry during the last installment, after she went batshit crazy and tried to stab him. Dwight feels like Rick doesn't care about anyone and can't be trusted to lead his people. The problem I have with this is that not only does Dwight's newfound desire to be in charge feel incredibly forced, due to him not enjoying it one bit when he was briefly the Saviour's leader, it's also really hard to get behind him being so angry about Sherry dying when she was just a constant bitch to him. The last time they crossed paths, she was trying to instigate a coup against Rick, and even watched on as Dwight was punched and strangled in front of her. When John asked her if it was okay to attack Dwight due to their past, she replied by saying that Dwight had chosen his side, and showed zero emotion as he was assaulted. There was no love lost from her, so I can't understand why Dwight would be hung up on someone who clearly didn't give a shit about him, and to see him challenge Rick's leadership because of this doesn't really sit well with me. Thankfully, despite not being a fan of Dwight trying to compete with Rick, I did love Rick's badass response in which he made it clear in no uncertain terms that if Dwight ever said anything like that again, he'd kill him. What's one more fucking grave was the exact line that he used, and Rick said this to him after explaining that with Andrea's death, Dwight's weird attempt to gain power was the last thing that he needed. It showed that Rick really was at the end of his tether and was absolutely not to be messed with. Similarly, I like the fact that Laura also didn't take any of Dwight's crap, and not only told him that he was being an idiot in blaming Rick for Sherry's death when she was the one trying to kill him, but in the end she actually left him due to his constant pining over his ex when he was supposed to be with her. To be honest, I can't blame her. I wanted to reach through the comic panels and give him a slap myself. Dwight needs to wake up and stop making Sherry out to be this infallible angel of a woman, when in reality all she did was think about herself. Moving on now from one crazy lady to another, as I obviously couldn't go this entire review without mentioning this volume's cover girl Princess, who a lot of fans seem to have gone crazy for. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but for the most part I just found her to be incredibly irritating. I understand that because she'd been living on her own for over a year she wasn't too great around people, but she was just so over the top, and I can see why Michonne was quickly getting annoyed with her. If anything, to me her character seemed like a desperate attempt to make a female version of Negan with her eccentric attitude and dialogue. minus the bad language of course. I found myself rolling my eyes when she was talking about her rad spear, or when for some reason she decided to put her goggles on her face properly when she was shooting some walkers. She feels like a really gimmicky character, and I can't say she currently interests me at all, although hopefully this will change. Another thing that I didn't really enjoy was witnessing the return of the Whisperers, specifically their de facto leader Beta. The thing is, I like the fact that the fate of Beta was left open-ended after the end of the Whisperer War. The panel in which he leads the dead to Alexandria and says the dead will finish what we started is a personal favourite of mine. And I love the concept of him leading this huge herd to Alexandria, fully confident that they would do his bidding, only to then disappear and never be seen again. I mean, every villain in The Walking Dead bar Negan gets killed, so I feel it would have been intriguing to have an ambiguous outcome for an antagonist just this once. Instead, what actually happened involved Beta returning out of nowhere and sneaking up on Jesus for some reason, and then getting shot and killed by Aaron. Even though the fight sequence did look good, it was a very anticlimactic death, and it felt shoehorned in just so the writers could have a definitive conclusion to his story. For me, however, I didn't think a definitive ending was really needed. Beta wasn't the best villain anyway, it's not like I really needed to see an end to his story. In fact, I would have never cared if he never showed his Walker face again. His return followed by his swift death felt like it was only included just to bolster up the amount of action scenes found within this volume. Seeing him return out of the blue just to be killed so quickly was an extremely underwhelming and unnecessary end for his character. Anyway, I did mention earlier that for all the book's flaws, it does have a great start and ending, and the ending is what I want to talk about next. Throughout this volume, Maggie makes a point of saying how annoyed she is with Rick's decision to exile Negan and let him go free. So come the end of the 6 included issues, she tracks him down to his new home with the full intention of killing him. Negan is shown to be living a pretty miserable life in his new abode. Not only is his place a bit of a dump, he also spends all of his time on his lonesome, with him visiting Lucille's grave practically every day, as illustrated when he says to her that he will see her again same time tomorrow. I know Negan has done a lot of horrible things, but I did sympathise with him seeing him like this. This is no way for anyone to live, and I actually think he may have experienced a better quality of life in Rick's prison cell than what he had now. With him still obsessing over his broken bat and in turn his dead wife, Negan set out to make Lucille too. And at this point I was kind of worried that the plot may have been about to tread familiar ground once again, with Negan reverting back to his old ways. Luckily, it's at this point that Maggie shows up wanting to kill the man who murdered her husband. In my view, what happens next is the best segment of this whole volume. Negan apologises for what he did to Glenn, but explains that at the time he did deem it necessary. He doesn't really make excuses for his behaviour, instead he accepts what he did and agrees with Maggie that he deserves to die. Now, I'll admit it's hard to ever know if Negan is being sincere or not, but he did seem it during this conversation. And in fact I would say this is the most honest I've ever seen him be. Just when the reader would most likely start feeling some degree of sympathy for him, Maggie explains to him that all she sees when she tries to picture Glenn is Glenn on the floor with his eye popping out of his head, slurring his words as he desperately tries to reach out to Maggie whilst Negan is stood bending over him laughing. This really hits home the concept that even though Negan may appear to be apologetic, it doesn't change the fact that what he did to Glenn was absolutely abhorrent, and no amount of begging for forgiveness can take that moment back. In the end, Maggie decides the worst punishment for Negan is to let him live with what he has done, especially after he asked her to kill him, resulting in her not wanting to give him what he desired. I've been waiting for these two to come face to face for a long time, and their eventual meeting certainly didn't disappoint. After leaving Negan to his own devices, Maggie reunited with Dante and kissed him, much to his shock as well as mine. Negan on the other hand burnt his new Lucille, leaving the bats behind for good. It struck me at this point that this volume was really about the concept of people moving on, and how different people react to tragedy. Rick and Dwight both at the moment can't move on, with Rick spending his time constantly lying next to Andrea's grave, and Dwight spending his waking hours obsessing over a woman who it appears never really loved him. Maggie however found the strength to not take vengeance on Negan despite wanting to for so long, and in turn she also found the strength to find a new happiness with Dante. In addition, by burning his new bat, Negan also moved forward and resisted the urge to revert back to his old ways. Does this mean we will see a new changed Negan from now on? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but the possibility is there. The story will also move on to pastures anew, with Michonne leading the group out to Ohio, where I'm guessing they go on to encounter the New World Order. This all fits in nicely with what I mentioned at the start of this review about this volume feeling to me like a transitional piece. And although at times this can pay dividends as illustrated by my views on the fantastic encounter between Maggie and Negan, A lot of the time it can feel like the story isn't quite where it needs to be, and as a result it becomes less engaging to read. Don't misunderstand me, I am looking forward to seeing exactly who the New World Order are, as well as finding out what happens next, but due to the significant lull in the middle of this volume of The Walking Dead, it didn't quite grab me like the rest. I just hope volume 30 kicks the next real chapter of the narrative into gear, because as of now the story just seems to be a bit stuck in the middle of nowhere. So there you have it, that's my views on volume 29 of The Walking Dead. As always, please let me know your thoughts below, and with that I shall say thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.